This is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm here today with author and professor Shannon Hodges to discuss his counseling and fiction writing, and we'll also talk about the international counseling profession. So, Professor Hodges, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks.
That's good. Could we have you talk about your latest counseling book, its title, and what it's about?
Okay. The title of the book is 101 Careers in Counseling, Springer Publications. It just came out about a month ago. And the title kind of gives it away, 101 Careers in Counseling, you know. But a lot of people would say, how in the world do you get to 101? Can you count? So a lot of it is traditional, like school counseling, rehabilitation counseling, marriage and family counseling, mental health counseling, my field, career counseling. But also all the other variations, some of the new ones like genetic counseling, which is a combination of traditional counseling, you know, listing skills, paraphrasing, summarizing, all those different kinds of things, assessment, as well as stem cells, high-tech stem cells, and it's really the marriage of those two. So it's really an almost unique skill set. Then there's others like, you know, counselors who work in higher education in colleges or universities and so forth. There's really a whole lot of different approaches in there. Some new and some that are old and traditional, and some that are new and emerging.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us what led you to write this book?
Well, I was writing a practicum internship book for the same company, and they had chosen somebody else to write the 101. They have a series called 101, and it's career. They have books on social work, mathematics, psychology, and now counseling. They wanted to do counseling. Well, I was finishing the other book and I couldn't do it, so I wasn't thinking about doing the 101 Careers in Counseling. But the other person had to drop out just as I was finishing the practicum internship book. And so they asked, would you consider doing the 101 Careers in Counseling book? And I said, sure. So that's how it happened.
Very interesting, but still 101 careers in counseling seems like a lot. How do you get 101?
People keep asking, how do you get there? I tell them you got to read the book. So maybe that's a bit self-promotional, but
that's okay.
Here it is. I wondered about that. Honestly, I wasn't so crazy about doing this book because it didn't 101, but they sent me the social work book as kind of a model, and I looked through it and I thought, well, okay, I see how the social workers get to 101. And even though our field is similar but somewhat different than social work, I looked into it. So you have people like who are student affairs administrators who teach and counsel at community colleges and four-year colleges. You have people who are now counseling overseas in Australia, where I worked for a while, as well as in Singapore, etc. People who are teaching in colleges or universities and supervising clinics and on and on. And then all these related fields like professional coaching. Counselors are the main, and also social workers and psychologists, but counselors are the main profession doing that. And I've gotten connected with a psychologist and another counselor, and we're involved in the national movement. And counselors facilitator like what my wife does, going around the world and around the country. So there's just all these different variations that I never really thought about, and counseling is good background training for a lot of them.
That's great. And you've written other counseling books. Could you talk briefly about some of them?
Yeah, years ago I wrote a book called Peer Mentoring, and it was actually a broad book. It was the first book that I'd ever written. But after that came one of the American Counseling Association, a job search manual for counselors and counselor educators, how to navigate and promote your counseling career. Because what I was finding out was counselors, even though they were supposed to be good at career work and network and all that, I was finding most of them weren't. And I've taught career and have more than 20 years of doing career counseling and advising. So that was what got me interested. My co-author, Amy Reese Connolly, had been the career manager for the American Counseling Association. We had worked well together. We were different enough that we could cover each other's blind spots. So we came out with that book, and it's done pretty well. Then I came out with this idea for doing a book for practicum internship solely focused on the counseling profession. And people kept turning it down, and I was about to give up on it. I thought, okay, I'm going to pick one other book company and send it in. Sent it in the Springer, and the editor called me and said, well, I think it's a great idea, but it's going to take a few weeks. You know, I think you got a chance, but it's going to take a few weeks. All right. So I sent her a prospectus. She got back to me in 3 days. They loved the book, said, let's go with it. And it's become a bestseller. So it's
wonderful.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's But it's sold very well. It's in about 150 libraries, including Columbia and Yale and Stanford. You know, all of them. Kind of surprised, pretty good for a guy from rural Arkansas. So, and then I have the 101 book, and I'm writing a book on university counseling centers. What's the traditional approaches and what's new to those? What are the new challenges of counseling college and university students?
Great. What are you currently writing? For example, books, journal articles, a monthly column for Counseling Today?
I'm writing a lot. Probably, I'm overextended, which is kind of how I tend to run. I just finished a research article with a couple of colleagues that we're sending off to a journal. It was on purpose in life for students, not only in counseling programs but undergraduates. You know, part of the issue is how do students see life meaning and life purpose? So that's what we're looking at. I write a monthly column for Counseling Today, which is the American Counseling Association's monthly magazine. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work because you're always on the bicycle of writing. I'm writing. I just finished one, a fiction book. I got to start editing it. I'm writing college counseling, university counseling center book. I'm writing a lot, and that's not all. I'll just stop there. I'm writing too many things, frankly.
Got a lot of deadlines.
Well, yeah, my life is deadlines now.
Deadline driven.
Basically it is. It's deadline driven now. And some of that's good. I want to be writing. The part that makes it challenging is I don't have the disposable time I used to have just to think about other projects. But I'll get clear of some of these, and I'm going to narrow my approach in the future, at least I think.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'd like to shift gears just a bit now. I've heard that you have written a mystery novel with a counselor as the protagonist. Could you tell me a little bit about the book, the main character, and perhaps your reason for also writing fiction?
Okay, the book is titled City of Shadows, and it is a mystery novel, and to my knowledge, it's the first mystery novel with a counselor as the main character. Now, we've had a lot of books with psychiatrists and psychologists as the main character, similar fields, but different fields. So this is the first one. So one of the interests is I really do love fiction writing, particularly in the mystery genre. I always have. And I've read probably a couple of thousand mystery books, so I thought, I could probably write as well as a lot of people. So now that may not be true, I don't know, but at least that's what I thought I'd try. So writing the book was probably the hardest piece of work I've done, but the most rewarding. Because what you're doing when you write a novel is you're creating an entire world, and you're bringing it to life. It gives you kind of a bird's eye view, so to speak, or a window in creating this world and the nuances of it, and what's going on behind the scenes, and the drama and the psychodrama and all that. I always thought that, I didn't know if I was any good, but I always thought I would enjoy that. And it's very rewarding. It's hard work, but it's the most rewarding kind of writing I've done. So the main character is kind of unusual. We share some commonalities from rural Arkansas, but he's an orphan. I'm not an orphan. Oh, I'm not. But he has had a lot of struggles, and he gets this one-year job in this elite college in rural Minnesota. And it's a college, and he gets it only because they're very desperate. He's just finished his doctorate, he's struggling getting a job, and he winds it. And during an early counseling session fall term, he stumbles into this conspiracy, just by what the student tells him. Well, he doesn't really think much about it, but the student gets killed just days after this. And then he starts to get phone calls, threatening phone calls, and someone's leaving him secret messages in a book in the library that's never been checked out. And there's all this craziness that's going on, and he's trying to figure out, one, what's behind it, and two, how do I survive? And the mystery and the conspiracy involves some of the prominent people at this elite university. So that's kind of how it is,
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. How different is writing a novel, say, from your professional books on counseling?
Writing fiction is totally different than professional writing, but all these different writing. Writing a journal article is different than a book chapter, is different than a book, is different than fiction, is different than poetry. But I like all those. In particular, the two I really like the best would be fiction writing and the monthly column I'm doing, even though it's hard work. But they're all very different. Fiction writing, when you're writing professionally, like the books I've written, You're just trying to get basic information out. You know, here are the facts, here is what we see the trends going, here are the applications, here's some changes for the future driven by technology. So you're mainly trying to inform and persuade. When you write fiction, you're trying to inform and persuade, but you're also trying to entertain. And to entertain means that you have to be able to write clearly and take all these different pieces and weave them together in a way that makes some coherent sense. And that's very much on-the-job training. I think you can be taught how to write fiction, but I think really to do it well, I guess like anything else, you have to get out and just start doing it. And fall on your face and all those kind of things. You know, do the best you can. Yeah.
Thanks. That's great insight, Dr. Hodges. That's very interesting. Can you tell us now, what do you like best about writing in both your fiction and in your professional?
Yeah, I grew up in a very remote area of rural Arkansas, the Ozarks, very poor. Growing up, my grandparents, wonderful people, and four of my siblings growing up. We didn't have a car. We had a black and white TV with one station. The one salvation I had was I loved to read. And that has made the difference. And it stimulated me, I think, the desire to write, although that came much, much later. And
so reading was first.
Reading came first, yeah, and really developing an appreciation. And then at some point I just naturally wanted to start writing and see if I could. And I started that in grad school. And I started having some success, minor as it was. So what I really like about writing is taking thoughts and concepts and beliefs and all sorts of things, my interest, and weaving them together, whether it's professional writing or fiction, into some coherent framework. It also allows me the ability to do things I can't do with a spoken word. It's not the same as teaching. So it's a way of packaging all that together in a way that's both interesting and persuasive, and that's a real challenge.
I hear that weaving theme more than once in.
Well, it makes sense to me, weaving different threads together. There's, you talk about the connective tissue. I've got a friend who one of the things she does is she puts quilts together. She makes quilts. You have all these different patterns in the quilt. You got to figure out what's the connective thread that puts all these different ones together in some kind of a mosaic that makes sense, that works. Not something that just looks like chaos, but one that makes sense. That's what writing really is about.
Great analogy.
Yeah, it's what writing's about on any level. I don't care if you're writing your newsletter for your job or school, or whether you're writing for the New York Times, or whether you're writing professionally or a novel. That's what writing's about at some level, I think. To me.
Yeah. And so then, what is your favorite type of writing?
Two. One would be fiction. Which I talked about earlier. Being able to create this world, this interconnected world, that you can breathe life into, characters and plot and drama and all that. That really is a great feeling. The other is I've just started a regular column, but it's the kind of writing I've done in bits and pieces for newspapers and magazines before. So being able to do it regularly and talk about my perspective, for example, talking about how I see, my monthly article is called Through a Glass Darkly. And it's a secular column, but it comes from a saying of what the Christians call the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, St. Paul. But it's, again, not a religious thing. Mm-hmm. But he makes a statement, we see through a glass darkly. We talk about the future trying to discern what's truth. That's the way the future is. Nobody really sees the future, but we're trying to discern it. We see it, but dimly. Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to do in the profession is I'm looking at future trends and how things are going to change both for the field of counseling and higher education. And a lot of what I'm talking about, that's a lot of what I'm talking about in the monthly article.
Yeah, great. So where do you see your writing career, say in 10 years from now, for example? What types of books and so forth do you hope to do?
Well, there will be more novels, more fiction novels. There will be more professional books, that kind of thing. Those are two of the big ones, and there'll be electronic books as well as, how that goes. But yeah. That's okay. Both of those are going to be a big part of what I do. I hope there will be a good nexus between professional writing and creative writing. But I'd like to do both of those for the rest of my life, however long it is. I'm hoping for another 51 or 2 years of really active, meaningful, healthy life, you know. And you know something, I never thought about making a lot of money. I'd be in something besides education. I just want to be creative, you know, and I hope that whatever I'm writing, whatever it is, I hope there's something, at least some small pearl of wisdom for somebody. You know, whether it's somebody in the profession or a student or somebody who reads fiction or whatever. So a lot of professional books and a lot of fiction, and also more short stories. I just recently started writing short stories, but they're fiction stories. So all of that, you know, I've written a little poetry, but I find writing poetry much harder than writing prose.
Different animal.
It's a different animal, and I don't seem to be as natural to it. I've published some poetry. I've got a colleague who's a really good poet. But I think I'm a better prose writer than this guy I'm referring to, but he's certainly a better poet. I look at his and I think, that's better poetry than I write. Maybe I shouldn't write. So just stick to the prose and be happy.
You know where your strengths are.
At this point, I believe I do. And we will see where they are in 10 years. We'll see. Yeah.
All right, I'd like to move the interview back toward the professional arena for a bit. You have a strong interest in international education and counseling. What's the international counseling movement like, and how strong is that?
It's grown quite a bit. Now, it's been incremental growth, but it's starting to pick up momentum. And I really got a sense of that a few years ago when I was on my sabbatical. I taught in Australia. And it was a phenomenal experience because it's similar as Australia is to the US, it's different, okay? But it gave me the ability to meet people from all over the world because what I was finding was, because they're somewhat isolated, the Australians have done a good job of creating tentacles into all these different realms, particularly in Asia and also North America and Europe. It's really amazing what they've done. I was realizing that in Australia, there's some of these programs at Australian universities. They'd have offshore programs in Singapore and Hong Kong and other places. And it was really amazing. So what I learned from that, and also reading the book, Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat, so much as technology grew. So the counseling profession is all over the world. It's global. We're in places like Saudi Arabia. We're in places like Australia and Singapore and Hong Kong. And many others, as well as Canada, the United States, and so forth, New Zealand, Ireland, and so forth. But we're poised for real growth, particularly in Asia, and even in some of the African countries. So what I see in the future is every continent, we already have counseling profession on every continent. That will grow. I think in 7 to 12 years, just giving myself a little time, I think it will expand significantly. And I tell younger students, if you want to go work overseas in the 10 to 15 year range, and you're in your early to mid-30s, you can do that. That'll be available. It's happening now, but it'll really be available. Here's the other thing I see. We're going to form partnerships with people all over the globe. A student here might be, they might go over to New Zealand or to Singapore for a semester, do a practicum and the same coursework there, and then come back to us. We may have students from down there. That's going to happen. Of course, there will be web classes, but I think the really interesting thing is for a student to go into a different culture and really learn what it's like to have to work in that culture and across cultural lines.
So kind of international exchanges.
That's exactly what we'll be doing. In fact, interestingly enough, my boss and I, we even talked about that this morning. How are we going to do this? It isn't just counseling, it's also teacher education. It's social work, psychology, all these different programs. These are international programs. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's exciting. I think it's the most exciting thing that's happened in a long, long time for the profession and for higher education.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, picking up on the international counseling movement a bit, how developed is it and where do you see it going?
It's just starting to get developed. I know the president of the International Association for Counseling. He's our former national president, and he's going to be guest writing at college. His name's Dr. Cortland Lee. He's at the University of Maryland. He really is a phenomenal man. Now, we're not close friends or anything. He is somebody I really admire. He's someone we all admire. And I think he's really going to spearhead and take the international movement. He's really helped build the base, but he's got it poised, and he's getting it organized, and it'll really start to take some giant steps. So it's, again, getting stronger. But I think, like I said, the next 7 to 12 years, that's when we'll see a difference. But again, go, and I say to anybody out there in any field, go back and take a look at Friedman's book, The World is Flat. Now, some of it has already happened, but what I get from it is how powerful technology is. And it's doing for counseling and higher education what it's doing for business and industry. Meaning, this is a revolution that we're in the midst of.
Technology.
Yeah, and I'm excited about it. There's some things I don't like, I'm not crazy about because I'm an immigrant to this. But there's other things, the international market, international partnerships, going abroad. I've got a good colleague in Australia, at the University of Notre Dame, Australia. He brought me down there. I'm bringing him up here in fall of 2013. We'll have partnerships. There'll probably be, we might even have joint programs. That's happened where you maybe have a joint program from your program in the United States, your counseling program is joint with somebody in New Zealand or somebody in Ireland or somebody in Great Britain or somebody in Singapore, wherever. And students go back and forth. You know, there's Dr. Lee has their program is joint with the University of Malta. They got a master's in multicultural counseling. You know, and you do it at both places. Some online, but you also go there, and some of them go to the University of Maryland. So eventually, we'll do something like that here at Niagara University and at other places like Niagara University.
It's a new world.
It's a new world. It really is a new world.
Well, given that cultures can vary greatly, is counseling viable in non-Western cultures?
You know, in the past, people would have said no, because counseling is an applied field of psychology. And people would have said, no, this is not. But every culture has always had somebody who served that role, whether it was a priest or a rabbi, whether it was a wise woman or a shaman or somebody like, every culture has somebody. It may not be in some scientific professional way like counseling and other fields, but they have that. Yet, here we are. I had a classmate in my doctoral program. She went to Oman and created the first counseling program. I talked about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a radically different culture from the United States. They have counseling. In fact, we have an applicant who's from Saudi Arabia. We are all over the globe. We're in northern and southern and sub-Saharan African continent. We're in all over Asia. Like I said, Australia, New Zealand. We've actually been there quite a while. And clearly, we're in Canada and so forth. Some
quite
South
history there.
Yeah, quite history, but it's also some in Central and South America. These started out as isolated pinpricks. They've become dots. In a decade or so, it's going to be very full. You'll see these all over the place. One of the differences is in these other cultures, they often start with a baccalaureate degree. Let me say one more thing, because I got off of the culture of this. Let me read. When I was in Australia, I listened to a talk from an addictions officer who was from Melbourne originally. He got a job in remote Australia, Central Australia, and he's working a lot with people, Aboriginal cultural people, native Australians, you know, the first Australians. Here's how it changed. In Melbourne, Australia, he saw people in his office, individual group counseling, that kind of thing, etc. But in remote Australia, he couldn't do that or they wouldn't trust him. He had to go out on kangaroo hunts, because if he didn't, he wouldn't be seen as respecting their world. It wouldn't be violent. He had to go to cultural events. He had to go out and spend a few days with a family. Now, some people would say, that's a problem with boundaries. But here's the thing. You have to make cultural adaptations. This is the tough thing. You have to make, yeah. And there are some you have to make, and maybe there are some you can't. But you got to find the ones you can, or you're not going to be viable. Because boundaries and such, and what's appropriate in Western society is not appropriate in many indigenous cultures and many non-Western. You got to find out how to bridge it. People are doing that right now, and that's what we have to do. That's what this global market is about. Everybody has to change a little bit, including us.
Just thinking, what would be the update to the old expression, when in Rome,
right.
do as. But what's the non-Western version?
When in Saudi Arabia, when in Alice Springs, Australia, when in Singapore, you have to adapt to doing what some of the locals do there. And let me relate one more thing. I Aboriginal artist in Alice Springs, incredibly gifted and beautiful art. She said to me, she asked me to explain counseling, and I did, and she said, "How many days do you spend with a family that you counsel?" And I asked her to explain that. She said, "Well, you know, our healers, they go out and they'll live with the family. How long would you spend?" So I began to explain traditional counseling, and she shook her head and she patted me on the shoulder, and she said, "If you come to the Alice, I'll take you around and get you oriented. You know, you're going to have to make some changes if you want to come here and be successful." But she's not. She's saying, "I'll take you around. I'll mentor you. I'll mentor you. I'll help you."
You
know?
guys.
Yeah, that was very powerful, and it's a way of saying you've got to change to be viable in our world, and that's what we. So we have to make some of those changes.
Well, you've touched on some of these, but I was going to ask you, what are some of the countries that you've taught in and made presentations and traveled to?
I've taught in Australia, of course, and I had it was amazing. I had, in one class, I had 22 students, but 14 were from different countries, all over the globe: Africa, South America, North America. I had one American, one U.S. person, one Canadian, Ireland, Egypt, but also from India and from Korea, and from Thailand and China and South Africa and Kenya. And it was incredible. It was an incredible experience. My wife and I go overseas. We've made presentations in different places in Asia and Central America. She's done them in South America and across the Caribbean. Canada, made presentations in Canada as well.
That counts.
That counts, I know. We also will be going to Africa, and we'll be doing some, we're going to do some social stuff. I also want to get connected. I've always had a big interest in Africa, particularly, I've always been more interested in the Southern Hemisphere. I don't know why, but I always have been. So getting more connected up with some of the African universities and going back. I've got a couple of colleagues from different countries in Africa. So part of it will also be branching out and doing some work with colleagues in Africa and that kind of thing. So there will be a lot of this. I can think of a handful right now over the next 10 years that we'll probably, my wife and I together, and me as a professor, will have ties into. And we've been doing that, but it will pick up. It's going to pick up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very impressive. Okay, if someone is interested in a counseling career, what's the most important thing he or she needs to understand?
You've got to, there's several things. And so it's hard to put it into one. You have to understand, and you have to enjoy the challenge of working with people who are struggling, because you're working with people who are struggling, whether it's a career issue or an academic issue, whether it's somebody who's been traumatized, through being in a war zone or combat, or through sexual assault or sexual abuse, you name it.
Returning veterans speaking.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you have to be both interested in and resilient enough to work with people who struggle. That's one. Two, you have to be able to develop the ability to work with people who are different than you, ethnically, religiously, culturally, sexually, geographically, class-wise, and so on.
Diverse ways.
In all kinds of diverse ways. Students will ask, what's this multiculturalism about? This is the other thing I say. When you go to a culture and you're the minority, you understand what multiculturalism is about. I remember my first trip to Korea to see my older brother. I understood cultural assimilation. You have to go there and do that to understand what people are. So you've got to be able to work across lines and develop a comfort and a competence with that. Three, we've talked around this global market thing. And I know people don't like me using the word global market when we talk about higher ed, but it is, I'm sorry. You had better be prepared to go into a different culture and work, because that's going to be a big part of not only what counseling does, not only what teacher ed, psychology, higher education in general, business, and it's a globally connected world, and it's only going to get more globally connected. You will have to work with people who are different than you, and for all those ways. And that is the third. That's probably the three biggest things that you've got to develop. Three most important, I would say, at this point.
We see that even right here on the Niagara University campus with your international faculty members, with international students. it's both ways.
It is, and here's the funny thing. We're right here on an international border. If you go to the front of campus and you look across, we're up on a cliff, of course, if somebody could go to the website. But you look across and you're looking at Canada. And again, while Canada is a Western country, it is a little bit different in the United States. I certainly respect Canadians and the fact that they are different. And actually, I think that's what makes it interesting. But we're on an international border, close to Toronto, one of the most diverse cities on the globe. This institution's becoming more global, students and faculty and staff, and we need to be. The other thing we've got to do, we even have a small campus in Toronto, but the other thing we have to do, we have to expand into these other different places in China and India. My boss, one of my bosses, the vice president for academic affairs, Dr. Downs, just went to India and China with some other people from there. We've always had people coming in from Germany and Chinese places. We're going to have more of them. Not only in the College of Education, not only in College of Business, not in the College of Hospitality, but in all colleges and undergraduate programs. We'll be bringing people in for short-term certificate programs, you know, during the summertime or spring or whenever. And in a few years, that is all going to transform this institution. This institution will be very different than what it's been. It's been a good school. It's been a good college. But it'll have a far more international focus and flavor. And again, I respect where we've been, but I'm excited about where I see us going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As a writer, what do aspiring writers need most to understand?
I think of something I read about Einstein, and I don't know if this is a real quote or apocryphal or what, and it was, someone asked him about genius. He said it was 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Well, I'm no genius. I know Einstein. I know that. Not saying that. Writing is probably 99% perspiration. You get an inspiration and you do an outline and stuff. You need some research. But you've got to be disciplined enough to sit down and carry it forth. You've got to be able to sit down several days a week and write and have that kind of discipline. And it's much more about the latter piece than it is about former piece. It kind of reminds me of my monastic days. You know, it isn't the mystical experience. It's the discipline that leads up to that. It isn't, I heard Yvon Chouinard, who owns Patagonia clothing, he's an incredible man, yeah. I heard him say in a documentary, he was talking about the Zen path, and he's a very Zen guy, and somebody I've read about for 30 years. It's not getting on top of that mountain. He's a mountaineer. It's all the discipline and it's the experience of the journey. The journey really is the destination in a sense. I think that's true in education. I think that's true in a career. And I certainly think that's true as a writer. I would say that's what I understand, all those different pieces. It's hard work. You have to be inspired occasionally to keep you going. You have to work hard at it, but you also have to remember it's the experience that's really more important.
Great. Dr. Shannon Hodges, we certainly appreciate your being here with us today, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right.